Okay, thank you all for coming. Sorry you don't all have chairs over there. Okay, so I want to speak to you tonight, Parshas Lecha, and can begin with Rashi. Rashi tells us that Avram was not able to have children, but Avraham was able to have children. Rashi tells us that either Hashem raised Avraham above the stars, whatever that means. He looked down upon the stars from above. And the other thing he says is that Hashem took Avraham out of his Mazal. He removed Avraham from his current Mazal. It sounds like it's at least in part connected to adding the Hey to his name, the idea of changing a name, adding a name, changing a person's Mazal, and that caused, at least in part, the change in Avraham's Mazal. Avram couldn't have children, but Avraham can have children. And so it happened. So I want to talk to you a little bit about, somebody asked me a little while ago about explaining Mazalos, understanding what astrology is a little bit. I'm definitely not an expert on the subject, but I can share with you some sources on the topic and give you at least a little bit of a beginner's understanding of it. And we'll see where we can go from there. So the first thing to know is, how many people here by a raise of hands think they know the difference between astrology and astronomy? We got 2 out of 40? So that's a very basic definition that we must start with, that you should know just to be basically educated people. And that is, astronomy is simply the scientific study of kind of like the geography of the sky, of space. So where the sun is positioned and the orbits that the planets take around the sun, and how all the stars and solar systems are positioned relative to each other and how they move, that's all astronomy. How the earth is positioned according and towards the sun, depending on whether it's summer or winter, which the way the tilt of the earth goes, with the spin, the speed, all that is the study of astronomy. Those are all astronomical calculations that astronomists are making. Astrology is a completely different subject. It's actually a subject that many scientists nowadays would say is a silly subject. Astronomy is a real science. It's the geography of space. Astrology is the study of what we can call on a simplistic level the 12 different constellations that are around planet Earth. From the perspective of planet Earth, if you look in a 360-degree view, you can see 12 different groupings of stars. Now, from an astronomical perspective, that has no significance other than mapping the sky. From an astrological perspective, there's significance to those 12 different groups and to which one we're in. So the first thing we have to understand is that we see in Chazal, we see in the Torah that Mazal is a real thing. It's not a fake thing, it's a real thing. But this just boils down to understanding that there's more than just the physical, natural realm of this world. There's a supernatural realm. If a person's willing to believe in a God who is by definition supernatural, God is not something that can be tested upon, experimented with. He's beyond the realm of time and space, this world, the physicality, its spirituality, its supernatural. Once you accept that such a realm exists, and to accept God automatically means you accept such a realm exists, then you're also accepting that we have other aspects of supernatural beyond the physical realm, spiritual realm. Malachim, angels, and astrology, mazalos. So let's understand what Mazal is. We don't have a problem believing in its existence, even though we can't test it in a scientific study. We can't test God either. We can have a discussion for all of those who were in Lecha last year. We can have a long discussion about all the rational evidence that points to the existence of God. The credibility advantage Judaism has by far over any other option, including atheism. We can discuss that at length. But for now, given that we believe in that, if you want to discuss that, we can, let me know. But given that we believe in its existence, what is astrology? What are the mazalos? So astrology essentially is, on a basic level, this is already a little bit Kabbalistic, is the flow of existence that comes from Hashem continuously to make everything exist in this world goes through levels. And there's all sorts of Kabbalistic ways to describe those levels. But one really basic elementary way of describing it is that it goes from Hashem through angels, through the world of angels, the world of Malachim. It goes from there through the world of Mazalos, sun, moon, stars, constellations. And it goes from there through to us, to this physical world. It kind of gets filtered down from pure, let's call it, just for lack of me knowing it better than this, pure spirituality slowly coming more closer, and then ultimately to Gashmias, to physicality, as we experience reality within our physical bodies, with our physical brains and our physical perceptions. So that's the flow of existence from Hashem. The spiritual realm and that flow coming down to us is actually the most real. It needs to be filtered and, so to speak, less real, till it gets to us, which is an interesting concept in of itself. Avodah Zarah actually began this way. The Rambam says that Avodah Zarah began with people recognizing the truth that the stream of existence from Hashem is coming in the last step from those stars, the sun, the moon, etc. But slowly but surely made the mistake of starting to daven directly to those bodies instead of to where it's ultimately coming from, Hashem. Also an interesting idea. Each nation in the world has its angelic representative, has an angel that is over that nation. Klal Yisrael has directly Hashem. However, if a Yid lives in Chutz La'aretz, then whichever nation he's considered to be living within, that nation's angel is going to be in charge of directing a lot of what even that Jewish person gets because he's under the auspices living in that nation's country. Rashi in this week's parsha, the Ramban discusses it at length, mentioned the Chazal, Kol Adar b'chutz la'aretz kilu ein lo Elokah. A person who lives outside of Israel, it's like he has no God. What does that mean? Ramban explains at length. Rashi brings it down. What it means is that since comparatively in Chutz La'aretz you need to get your shefa, the stream of existence comes through more mediators, through more steps, not as direct from Hashem. So it's as if compared to in Israel where it's straight from Hashem, it's as if Ki'ilu Ein Lo Elokah. Okay, another idea affecting the idea of Mazalos and Eretz Yisrael itself. So let's get into the technical point for a second. How do we know which Mazal we're in? Each month has a Mazal. How do we determine what Mazal is for the certain month? Okay, so it's determined at Rosh Chodesh. At the moment of Rosh Chodesh, that's when it's determined. What? What determines it? So most people don't know this very basic point about astrology of the constellations. I'll just teach it to you right now. Which constellation are we in? If you look up at the nighttime sky, you're looking at a group of stars. Is that the constellation that we're in? The answer is no. You're 180 degrees off. The constellation that we're in is the constellation that the sun is pointing to. Picture the sun, right? Here's the earth going around the sun. So we're this little area right here. Then there's tons of stars all around in a 360-degree 3D circle all around this midpoint that is the earth going around the sun, right here. Stars all around that. So when the earth goes around the sun is at any given point from the perspective of the earth like a dial of a clock pointing at a different constellation. If this point is the sun, if the earth is here, the sun's pointing at that group of stars. If the earth is here, the sun's pointing at that group of stars, and so on and so forth. The sun is constantly pointing from the earth's perspective at a different group of stars. It is the sun that is determining which group of stars we're in, which means, unless there's a solar eclipse, you can never see with your eyes which Mazal you're in. You can only figure it out by mapping the stars around the earth. And whenever you see at night, you can know, when this earth turns, I'll know the sun is pointing to a certain group of stars. So it's the sun that actually determines which stars we are in, so to speak, which Mazal we're in. So that's just an interesting point. The sun is actually determining that. So at Rosh Chodesh, whichever one the sun is in, that's the Mazal for that month, and that's how we determine that. Now, some would say that Mazalos don't affect Klal Yisrael. We could just ignore this whole thing. Because after all, Ein Mazal Yisrael, Chazal say. That means that we're above whatever these Mazalos mean, right? Each Mazal has some type of tchuna to it, some type of personality to it, a koach to it. The most famous one being the Mazal of Mars, whichever one that is, red, blood. So there's a certain viciousness to that, whatever you want, however you want to call it, a certain. So that Mazal, if you're born in that Mazal, it can affect you. If you're in the midst of being in the time of that Mazal, it can affect you in certain ways. This is a chachma that requires much more than what I'm telling you to be able to figure out how it affects a potential trip you're going to make, let's say. But that's a real chachma. But Ein Mazal Yisrael, it doesn't affect us, right? We're Jewish people, we're above Mazal, beyond it. So Tosfos says, Ein Mazal Yisrael just means that if you daven, you can break out of whatever that Mazal would dictate for you. So if the Mazal says this is supposed to happen to you or this type of scenario should happen to you, daven, and you can break out of it through the koach hatfilah. That's unique to a Yid, to a Jew. That's all Ein Mazal Yisrael means. That means without davening for something or to that something shouldn't happen, we are absolutely subject to mazalos. That's Tosfos. The Ramban says, very interestingly, that Tamim Tiyah, that mitzvah says, be complete with Hashem, be perfect with Hashem, don't go to all these different ways to figure out, it's an isser, it's a prohibition, it's an isser against going to someone who really knows the chachma of astrology to tell you the future. It's usser, it's an aver, you're not allowed to. However, says the Ramban in the Ksavim, there's other Rambans that sound differently, but you can put them together. Says the Ramban in his Ksavim, however, if the astrologist tells you you should not go on this trip, it's dangerous for you, Ein somchen ala nes, you're not allowed to go. It's also for you to go. Ein somchen ala nes. Just showing you. Yeah, it's true, Ein Mazal Yisrael. But really, yes, Mazal Yisrael. And maybe like Tosfos, the tefillah can break us out of it. Maybe we could suggest it's not affecting us the same as the rest of the nations of the world. But says the Ramban, if you're told by it, you shouldn't seek it out. But if you're told by an astrologist something's dangerous, ain't some you're not allowed to go. Fascinating. By the way, whenever somebody has a simcha, what do we say? So, if we're saying Mazel Tov, we're obviously giving some type of credibility, some type of reality to Mazel. We're not saying Mazel's for them, not for us. Obviously. One last point in the significance of Mazel and how it affects us, and we see it in the Torah, and how we should have a consideration for it. The Yerushalmi tells us that when Moshe Rabbeinu was lifting his hands up in the war against Amalek, so the Gemara tells us already, Bavli tells us already that, of course, it wasn't Moshe raising his hands that made them win the war. It was Klal Yisrael through that, directed their kavanah to Hashem, and that's how they won. Says Yerushalmi, you know what Moshe Rabbeinu was doing with his hands raised up? Amalek knew that if it was a person's birthday, if it was their mazel, they had extra strong warriors to send to battle based on that, and they could win the war like that. So Amalek was sending out those soldiers based on the mazalos. And you know what Moshe Rabbeinu was doing miraculously? He was messing around with the positioning of the stars to confuse Amalek so that they wouldn't be able to tell which mazel it was, so they couldn't select the right soldiers to go to battle. Says Yerushalmi. How metaphorical that is, I don't know. But fascinating idea, again, recognizing the truth and significance of mazalos, of astrology being a real chachma. Nowadays, we do not have this chachma. When you look at a horoscope, if you've ever read them, it might be usher to read them, unless maybe it's so obvious that it's a joke. There's a chachma to that too, but it's not the chachma of mazalos. That is a chachma actually of psychology. There are many studies done. There are some very well-made studies done where they would literally video a person saying the same words, slightly different tones of voice, different pauses, switching the order around a little bit for different people based on how they responded in the conversation, videoing each person's one-on-one conversation with this expert, with this seemingly professional horoscope person, I guess he would call himself an astrologist, and and at the end they put all the people together, and they said, how many people here believe that they were really told, like, about themselves, and it makes a lot of sense how things are happening in their lives according to that. And everyone raised their hand. And then they went through each one of like the 6 main things that he said to them. In the way that it's phrased, it's so beautifully generic, but sounds like it's not, and so personal that of course it applies to everyone. Like, how many people in this room in the past week have had something significant happen to them? There might be 1 or 2 people who'll be like, no, nothing significant happened to me last week. Absolutely nothing. But like anyone, especially someone who goes to the person and wants to know something, so you're looking for something. You say, something significant happened. You know, I did chop that one Tosfos. That's significant. Wow. What else can you tell me? You know, so there's you can say generic things, and when you say it with the right tone of voice, with the right confidence, essentially being a con artist, which stands for confidence artist, you can trick people. And that's really what's going on over there. We do not have the chachma of mazalos, at least certainly not that I'm aware of nowadays, maybe in some areas of mukubalim and things that I'm not aware of, but certainly not that's accessible to us in any normal way. But this is the reality of mazalos, of astrology. And it's a fascinating subject to consider. We have it at Rashi in this week's parsha. It's something that's real. It has a real realm of existence, of the supernatural existence of this world that, like I said, is perhaps even more real. I guess the main takeaway point that I would leave you with is this. So which Mazal we're born in and which Mazal we're in time affects things. Which means that it's not true that we're all born with a clean, exactly equal slate. And come on, when you think about that, we know that. No 2 people are the same. It's not true that if 2 people work on the Gemara the same level, the same amount of time, they're going to understand it the same. It's not true that 2 people are going to play sports the same if they just were raised in the same house. I mean, look at siblings, look at twins, everyone is different. And everyone has different basic natural inborn kochos. Everyone has different ways in which the environment affects them and nurtures them. Everyone starts out different and becomes different. And we all have these different natural talents, difficulties, struggles, advantages, disadvantages. And Mazal is one of those. However that plays into it, it's a very supernatural concept. It's hard for us to really perceive that, but one thing we can know. Chazal tell us that no matter what Mazal you're in, let's say like that Mazal of blood as an example, Mars blood. Yes, it means you have a certain netiya towards murder. There's a greater possibility for you to become a murderer than someone not in that Mazal. But you also can channel that koach, that tchuna, that talent, that personality, however you want to call it, towards mila or shchita. So it's true, we all have certain general frameworks from within which Hashem is giving us to work. But within that, it's up to us. And when we learn Torah and we steig, we build Yiras Shamayim, Avas Hashem, Midos Tovos, and we build these chashava parts of ourselves. We take Limud HaTorah seriously. Limud HaTorah itself infuses a person with all the goodness when a person approaches it honestly and with a level of Yiras Shamayim. Then it shapes us and it guides us within whatever our tchunos hanefesh are, within whatever our personality is. So the main message here is, beyond the education on astrology, is don't get hung up on, but this is so hard for me and so easy for him. Or this is so easy and boring for me and he's really growing in it because he's got to work on it, right? The opposite. Don't get hung up on these things. Just focus on yourself and compare yourself to yourself. That's it. Where was I yesterday and where am I today and where can I be tomorrow? That's all you need to ask yourself. Grow to the extent that you can in whatever limud you're involved in. Bring out your own potential to the best way that you can in a healthy, balanced way, so that whatever your tchunos are, you're going to end up blossoming within that. Whether it's to ultimately become a Rosh Yeshiva, ultimately become a professional, a doctor, a lawyer, a scientist, a teacher, whatever, an accountant. It doesn't matter what it is that you do to make money and spend a lot of your hours of your day involved in throughout the rest of your life. Building yourself with Torah and Yirah Shamayim, mitzvos, midos, tovos, chesed. Those are the things that are going to grow you into the greatest person you can become, excelling at whatever your given talents are, whatever your God-given talents are, and you'll expand those. And that's really what you should be focused on. A lot of the negative emotions that are associated, especially at your age, but it's true with adults also, have to do with losing focus from yourself. Yourself becomes kind of blurry and you're focused in on everyone else. And sometimes they could be similar enough to you that maybe comparing and contrasting could be a little bit helpful, but almost always they're coming from a completely different place with a completely different set of starting points and environmental factors and everything. And the comparison is so off if you would only know, but you wouldn't know because nobody reveals everything about themselves and people don't even know that completely about themselves. So focus on yourself, grow yourself, and you're going to become the greatest person you can become. Making yourself into the greatest Ben Torah is going to make whatever talents you have shine the brightest and make you into the best person you can. Focus on that, and Emir Hashem, through us growing and changing ourselves within the framework that we have, we can break out even into higher frameworks. That's the lesson from Avraham. Yeah, there it happened through a change of name, but don't go start changing your names. You don't need to do that. Break out within the koach that Hashem gave us through tefillah, through Torah. Break out in those mahalchim, and you can even reach higher and higher madregas that maybe from birth you weren't even expected to reach, but you can now all of a sudden reach. Through that avoda, we'll give the Rebbeinu Shalom so much nachas. We'll each find our perfect place with clarity in the world, looking at our talents and following them, developing them. We'll be zocha to Shiach Tzidkenu b'meir v'yameinu amen. Shabbos.